Greetings and salutations, one and all. Come on in. It's a special edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes. Ancestral Veneration, Ancestral Veneration, Ancestral Veneration. You can utilize the STREAMYARD link and join us live on screen. You can also utilize the Blog Talk Radio phone lines at area code 845-277-9143, 845-277-9143. Remember to press the number 1 on your telephone keypad when you are ready with your question, comment, or request. And I'll be more than happy to bring you into this powerful conversation.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Alafia, beloved Tasha. Alafia, welcome, welcome. Come on in, come on in. The fire is hot. The water is boiling. It's time to put something in this pot. Greetings and salutations, Lily. Thank you, beloved, for being with us this special day. My cousins are here. My cousins are here. Greetings, Otun, beloved. Alafia. Greetings and salutations, one and all. Thank you so much for taking time out of the middle of your day, this special day when many are in memorial, many are in commemoration, many are in celebration today. So I appreciate your time and your energy and your love and your support. Thank you so much. Greetings. Greetings and salutations, one and all. Come on in. All is a blessing. Yes, all is truly and indeed a blessing. We have very special guests with us here today. Come on in, Madam Orisha and beloved Chef Bougie. I saw you a moment ago. Come on in. Greetings, Nina Lloyd. Welcome, beloved. Thank you so much for your consistent participation, love, and support. All is a blessing. Greetings, greetings. All is a blessing. Come on in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to another edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo, Secrets and Recipes. Welcome, welcome. Come on in. Greetings, Ashley Allen. Welcome, beloved. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for your time and love and energy and support. Come on, Orisha. Come on, Chef Bougie. Get that webcam together. Come on in, come on in. Welcome, welcome this holiday, this commemoration day, this Memorial Day. Come on in. Welcome, welcome. Did you watch the Tulsa burning documentary? Did you see the Tulsa burning documentary on the History Channel? Tulsa burning, the 1921 race massacre. Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit today, too. Greetings, greetings. I love my cousins. I love my cousins. Oloye, Ifawole, Oladeji. Welcome, beloved. Greetings and salutations. This is indeed going to be very good. The over-ambitious one. Indeed it will. And we appreciate you and we invite your participation. Oloye, you know we can see you, beloved. Ashe family, Ashe Shamafia Rothschild. Alafia, thank you, thank you. Yes, the gates are wide open, the ancestors are present. The ancestors, the Eguns have been invoked. Gede has been fed. Yes, this is a powerful day indeed. And we're going to talk about it in a very ATR-centered kind of way. We're not going to talk about Memorial Day in the way that many of you are familiar with Memorial Day. So come on in, share your comments, your questions, your requests. Welcome, welcome.
Morning.
Yes. Welcome, welcome. Yes. Welcome, welcome. Please forgive me. Chef Bougie and Arisha, I had to mute y'all because I'm getting feedback. But you're good. I'll unmute your mic when we're ready. Thank you all for being present this special day. I'm truly honored and grateful any day that you all take time out of the middle of your day, your schedule, to be present in this shared sacred space with us. Divine, all blessed greetings and salutations, elevation, revelations, and manifestation on this very special day. You are now sitting live with Pan-African spiritualist, practitioner, author, and advisor, Elagun Oloye, Hoodoo, Obeya, Bokur, sharing with you in all things spiritual, mystical, metaphysical, cosmic, evolutionary, revolutionary, healing, and holistic from a Pan-African Hoodoo, world spiritualist perspective, understanding that all is truly and indeed a blessing. If you can just see beyond the veils, for it is all just an illusion and a test, and one of the greatest divine mysteries of this life cycle. This is indeed my constant prayer, my mantra, affirmation, reverberation, reiteration, and it is my ever-living reality. All is a blessing, is crucial to the very foundation of my inner standing, my teaching, my walk, my work, my demonstration along this divine, all blessed life path and journey. It is how I, the DivinePrince, make sense out of all that we're challenged with here in this daily existence on Mother, Father, Earth. And it is my personal place of power and inner standing, the place from where I begin, the place from where I realize and crystallize all my endeavors, understanding that I and I alone create and co-create my divine destiny, and I alone create and co-create my divine, all blessed reality. And so it is. Ashe. Greetings again, one and all, everyone, both my Blog Talk Radio listeners at 845-277-9143. They're my Blog Talk Radio listeners who are listening from the show page at blogtalkradio.com/the-divine-prince. And of course, I welcome my Facebook, my Twitter, my Periscope, my EarthCam, my StreamYard, my cousins and my co-hosts, and everyone that's present here with us now in this shared sacred space. We want to acknowledge today, May 31st, 2021. For some of you, it's Memorial Day. For many, it's Commemoration Day. For others, it's Decoration Day. And indeed, we're going to talk a little bit more today about ancestral veneration. But as always, I want to sort of give it a context. How many of you watched the Tulsa burning documentary on History Channel? If you haven't, it's something you really got to see. So far, the documentary in its entirety is not available anywhere else. Not that I'm aware of. It could be on Amazon. I haven't really checked yet. But I watched it first last night on Hulu on the History Channel. It's called A Documentary Event from executive producer Russell Westbrook, directed by Stanley Nelson and Marco Williams, called Tulsa Burning, the 1921 Race Massacre. Now you might be wondering, well, why is he tying that and ancestral veneration together? First and foremost, who are your ancestors? Who are they? It's very popular right now. It's very faddish right now to say, I acknowledge the ancestors, all hail to the ancestors, I bow before the ancestors. But my godchildren, my clients, my initiates know that we ask, who are they? Exactly who are they? And for many of us, descendants of the Middle Passage, it's a complicated response. When looking at Tulsa's burning, they do have on YouTube the history channels, Tulsa burning, the 1921 race massacre, the creators in conversation. So a few of the producer, director, and I believe one of the descendants, grandchildren or great grandchildren of, are in the hour-long presentation that I showed just before the show. And again, it's called the History Channel's Tulsa Burning, the 1921 Race Massacre, Creators in Conversation. And this opened up, wow, this opened up whole new worlds of questions and information for me. After watching it, and watching it twice, by the way, and then the third time I fell asleep on it, it really made me think about how lynching, because this is really an act of terrorism, a massive act of lynching, and how lynching has been used historically to silence us, to dehumanize us, to strip us of any sense of power or control, to keep us in our place. And quite often, our self-employed, our entrepreneurs, our successful vendors, our resources were targeted more often than not in these acts of lynching. Let's understand, it was never about whistling at the white woman. It was never about making the pass at the white woman. It was never about, being disrespectful, in the face of some powerful white man. It was often about control, and particularly control of economics, control of land. And Tulsa burning is really popular and is and prevalent right now because they are celebrating the 100 years commemoration of this Tulsa burning. So you'll find many documentaries about it. You'll find many conversations going on about it actively right now. But again, it made me think about all the Black enclaves in America. Because see, we have a thing of heightening and sensationalizing particular events, particularly now in the day of digital media, where we can, record and videotape and take pictures. And many of the present modern day lynchings that have been taking place on Black and brown lives are documented in film. But think about the many that go undocumented, the many that go unacknowledged directly. And the families, many of our families, sit in pain, sit in trauma, sit in silence. After watching Tulsa burning, I called my mama. My mother grew up in a historic Black enclave. My grandparents, my mother's grandparents, built their house, two houses on the same property, had position, had a little bit of power in their town, had the respect that many Black families, and I'm sure many of the Black families in Tulsa had grown accustomed to. Understand this indigenous land, because originally it was indigenous land, and then Black people began to move there, and it became a very powerful Black enclave. And we think about, and I'm hoping my cousin has a little bit of history, to add to this. When we think about Oklahoma City, or Tulsa burning, often we don't understand that there were many, at least a dozen or more Black communities surrounding Oklahoma City, surrounding Tulsa, that were prominent for home ownership, for owning all the businesses. Because remember now, we're talking about Jim Crow, we're talking about the season of lynching, we're going to talk about that a little bit. And so we couldn't shop at the white man's store. We couldn't interact and do business, at the white stores. So we had to have our own businesses. And Oklahoma presented at that time sort of a free man's land, if you will, where it was well known throughout the country that Black people could go there and be autonomous and be independent and be successful, and to somewhat be free of sort of the much more negative terroristic activities that were going on in other parts of the country. So let's look at timing. The Tulsa burning incident, the massacre and terrorist attack on our community happened in 1921. That's a year before my mother's mother was born, a year before my maternal grandmother was born. She was born in 1922. I have done some research on lynchings throughout the country, and particularly timing, location, date. And so some of the highest numbers of lynching happened from 1900 onward until the present day. So when I think about 1921, there were 64 lynchings in 1921. There were 61 lynchings in 1921. There were 64 lynchings in I'm sorry, I'm giving it to you wrong. There were 61 lynchings in 1920. There were 64 lynchings in 1921. There were 57 lynchings in 1922, 33 lynchings in 1923. And not only, is Tulsa an important date for me personally, but my grandmother and her subsequent three sisters were all born in this time period. And the Black enclave that my maternal grandmother, her parents built a house and were a part of a powerful community in was known as Kirkwood, Missouri, and particularly Meacham Park, Missouri. Now, you can't find Meacham Park on a map today. It's now an industrial park, a parking lot, and attached to a shopping mall. And so when we think of places like Rosewood, another large footprint of terroristic attack on Black communities, on Black people, not just because we Black, not just because we Black, but because we had power, we had economics, we had a way of building some sort of what they would perceive as a threat to the quote unquote status quo, which was and still remains to be in largely white supremacy. And so watching this Tulsa burning really opened up, a stream of questions for me. And I called my mother and I asked her, did your grandparents ever talk about lynching? Because let's be clear, outside of the Deep South, St. Louis, Missouri is at the top of the list for lynchings. Even my mother didn't know that, at the top of the list. And so she said, no, my grandparents didn't talk about anything that was negative, that was scary, and many of our parents operated culturally in that way. Just as we often don't know who our ancestors are, we often can't call people by name. Our families, out of trauma, went silent, went mute on many of these issues. And the only reason we are now looking at and investigating, now digging up the ground, 100 years later from Tulsa, is because people decided to talk about it. Remaining generational grandkids, great grandkids decided to talk about it. And I believe they started talking about it right in the late 1990s. I think 1998, 99 is when journalists and book authors and cinematographers really began to approach the community and get their story, get their telling. And so that's what Tulsa burning is about. But in thinking about ancestral veneration, how do we acknowledge our ancestors? First, we got to know who they are. First, we have to look into their history. First, we have to be willing to do some study and some research and expand our research out, beyond just, my people and my scenario. Our people were interlocked, interconnected at many levels. And many of us, Otun and Oloye, we're finding that out now through DNA. And the importance of gathering this information and retelling our stories. In this quote unquote modern context, we're using words now like trauma. We understand words now like economic disparity. We understand terrorism now, in a way that our grandparents weren't even able to voice and communicate. Imagine being a state with the highest number of lynchings and your parents or grandparents not even discussing it, not even talking about it. But as I told my mother, I felt it. Even as a child, I knew that there was an invisible line in Kirkwood between Fillmore Avenue and Meacham Park and the rest of Kirkwood, which is almost entirely white today. It might have some integration, but it's almost entirely culturally white today. And I'm sure they coveted that land, much as the land was coveted in Tulsa. Right now, I can't remember the exact community. Oloye might be able to help me. But it was something like 40 square blocks of nothing but Black businesses. You know, from the shoe shine boy to the confectioners to the restaurants, everything was Black. And again, we had no choice. So first, find out who your ancestors are. Be willing to look at their stories. Be willing now to do some shadow work. Because I say it all the time, you can't really do ancestral work without shadow work subsequently bubbling up. If you're doing it right, because your spirit is open, your heart is open, your head is open, and you begin to ask questions. You begin to want to know. You begin to want to explore deeper that experience. So before we pour the libation, before we lay out the food, you know, before we set up, you know, a shrine table, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today, let's find out who our people are, who they are, and help rebuild our own stories. We got all kind of guests with us today, special guests. Some of my initiates and godchildren are with us. Of course, my cousins are here with us. My other co-host, Neophyte Bokur, is dressed in white, and he's here with us. And so I'm grateful. Can you tell by the look on my face? I'm really happy. As the sister said, this is going to be a powerful show. And again, I appreciate the support and the active participation from our guest on the phone lines, area code 845-277-9143. You're welcome to listen, but you're also welcome to press that #1 and ask questions and make comments. The chat is also open in both Blog Talk Radio and in StreamYard, Facebook, Twitter, EarthCam, wherever else we can be viewed right now live. Greetings, Alexis Williams. Greetings, beloved. So we invite your participation. The overall ambitious one, that's who said this is going to be a powerful show. So I'm going to assume, beloved, you saw the documentary. It was indeed powerful. It taught me things. Greetings, Mom. My beloved mother is here, Evangelist Gary Vonsell Savage. Joy, wisdom, peace, working and pressing on. Indeed, we are. Welcome, welcome, Mom. Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you, the ambitious one. Thank you. So I'm going to start with Otun, because I see that look on her face, and let her give her greetings and salutations. Y'all forget I can see your face now. And invite you to come on in and share your greetings with us. Then Oloye Ifawole is going to share his greetings. Then Chef Bougie and the beloved Orisha, Iba Orisha, Mojuba Orisha. They're gonna greet us, and then Neophyte Bokur is gonna greet us, and then we're gonna go in. We're gonna go in as deep as y'all can handle today on this topic of ancestral veneration. Go ahead, beloved Otun.
Boro Boye Boshishe, DivinePrince, Baba Oloye, Chef Bougie, Orisa, Neophyte Bokur, everyone watching. I just want to send my love and light to everyone. I am indeed also looking forward to this conversation and hearing the different aspects of it and where this goes. So blessings to everyone, and let's dive in.
Oloye, beloved, come on in. Greetings.
All right. Oboro Oboye Bashise. We greet our ancestors today. Oriki Egun. Egun Mopeo. Egun Mopeleo. Egun Gun Kiki Egun Gun. Egun Ashede. Morere ni Ori Egun. Emi Omona. kan eye ba ori egun adupe egun mi. Ancestors, I call you. Ancestors, I greet you. We praise the power of the ancestors. The wisdom of the ancestors is here. Good fortune comes from the wisdom of the ancestors. When I do not know which road to follow, I will turn to the wisdom of the ancestors. I thank my ancestors. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. We give honor to all those who've come before, those whose blood runs through each and every one of our veins. When we speak in the Yoruba sense of Egun, there's two expressions of it. Egun would be our blood ancestors, while Egungun would be the overall general ancestry as a whole. Whether we're honoring other people's families and such as ancestors. So Egun being our personal, Egungun being ancestors as a whole. So when we're talking about a little bit about Tulsa, my cousin was talking about Tulsa. There were 13 townships that were the main townships within Black-owned townships that were in Oklahoma, and those townships were very, very popular. They were very, very well known, of course. And so Tulsa, being Black Wall Street, of course, very well known. Right now, we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the situation. It's not celebrating; it's acknowledging the 100th-year anniversary of the situation up there. And there's many. Say it again.
Commemorating.
Right. And so there's a lot of different people that have been coming in and perform. Just a lot of different people coming into Oklahoma, to Tulsa. There were a couple of questions I believe that my cousin had asked. Greenwood is the name of the area that happened in. Greenwood today, when they rebuilt it, of course, wasn't rebuilt with many of the same building, with many of the buildings. Many of our people had moved out of the state and out of the city and all of that because of the violence that had happened. And so, unfortunately, Greenwood today, I believe it has a couple of the colleges up there, college campuses, and also there's other things that were built up, park or whatever, but not nearly built up with the same things that were built up there before. So, when we're talking about ancestry and we're talking about honoring all of those lives lost, all of those that are buried in the mass graves. There's a movement right now to try to find the mass graves, and the government out here, I believe, has blocked some of that research as well. So, if we remember during that time, 1919 to 1921, especially in 1919, we're talking about that hot red summer. And that red summer, these situations were happening all over the United States in many, many different states. Going into 1919, 1920, and this being one of the culminations in 1921. Many people lynched all over the place in mass graves and different situations where we don't even know the names of these ancestors. Of course, going back farther and the lynching back in the 30s and the 20s and going back further into all of those circumstances and situations our ancestors went through the enslavement, and then before that into the Middle Passage. The loss of connection between us and who we are today, and many of our, not just ancestors, But I would dare to say that each of us have actual blood family or relatives that are out across in Africa that, of course, you know, we don't know who they are. I can tell you in going over there that many times, you know, you have a semblance in your face of people in Benin or in Nigeria, and sometimes people will stop and look at you, and they'll ask the family that you might be visiting, "Is that your family?" And they'll say, "Yeah, that's our brother, that's our cousin from the United States," or whatever. So I don't want to talk too long. We have many people, but I just wanted to share, you know, the different townships, they were Black owned out here, and that was found across the United States and many of the different states. This situation with Tulsa being more known today because of commemorating the 100th anniversary right now as we speak. And then, you know, it gives light to much of what happened during that time and all of the businesses. There were so many businesses owned by our people that even the white people were coming in to borrow money from the Black people. That's something that people don't know. And the other thing that might not be known is that going back just before the land run, Oklahoma was deemed to be that land where the Blacks were supposed to go for their so-called 40 acres and a mule. But when they saw that there was so much out here in the resources, and they went through the land run, that took away all of that promise that was given to the Blacks of having their free land. So just to throw that in there too, that Oklahoma was deemed to be that land for the freed Blacks. And then, of course, we amalgamated within the Native American population out here with the freedmen. The other part to that is if everybody knows about the Lone Ranger, this is where the actual Lone Ranger was, the true one, and it was a Black man. His name was Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves was a well-known sheriff that was respected and knew the cultures of the different, I don't want to say tribes, but the different communities in the Native American communities, and not just in Oklahoma, but in Texas, up above us, Missouri, and all of that too. So Oklahoma does have a pretty interesting history, a pretty interesting story. Me not being from here, I'm limited, but those are a couple of things that you know, to give you guys some knowledge of. So blessings, and I look forward to the conversation. You're on mute, Divine.
Thank you. We certainly appreciate that, and always grateful for your active participation. I want to introduce Chef Bougie and his beloved wife, Orisha. I'd like you all to come in and give your greetings and salutations, and then talk a little bit about what ancestors mean to you. And if you can, a little bit about who your ancestors are.
Okay, hi. First of all, hi everyone. How's everyone doing today? And I'm going to turn it over to the spokesman of the family.
Okay, greetings everybody. I'm so happy that I'm able to sit here and be with you guys today. I'm always in the chat. I never get a chance to participate. And starting off, I just want to say thank you to DivinePrince for being able to facilitate this, where we can commune with one another. And Oloye and Otun and IleIfaOladeji, all the people that come in, it is a lot of energy to hold a space like this, to keep it going rather than being a participant and sitting and watching and participating in chat. It is a lot of work. And so I just want to tell you guys, thank you so much. I appreciate everything you do. I have a kinship with you, and you probably don't even know it. You know, this is the thing that I look forward to when I'm at work every day when the show comes on. In terms of ancestor worship, well, this is something just like, you know, walking, talking, breathing. This is something that has been incorporated into my life that is just a normal part of the everyday, you know, activities that we go through. It wasn't always that way, but it is now. I'm one of the oldest children in the family, so I've kind of taken up the spot of the matriarch and kind of responsible for those who have kind of, I want to say, like, have some cobwebs and don't remember ancestor worship. So I've kind of taken on that position and that role in the family to teach about ancestor worship. So that's, for right now, it's, yeah.
Your mute is on.
We're going to go to Neophyte Bokor next, and I will come back to you. I got some questions for you, Chef Bougie and Orisha, to answer and respond to. But I'm going to give Neophyte Bokor an opportunity to offer his greetings, salutations, and speak a little bit about what ancestral veneration means to you. And if you can recall some of your ancestry, we'd like to hear that.
Peace and blessings, family. Greetings, everybody in the chat. More importantly, blessings to the ancestors, especially today. Right now, I guess I can go into my ancestry. When I think of that, what comes to mind immediately is my grandfather, who I'm named after. Obviously, this isn't my real name here, but but not just him, but his father. I have his father's name as well. So the responsibility to uphold their names that were given to them and being able to pass that down, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about ancestral worship and being embodiment of who their legacy was, or what legacy they left behind. Just in the name alone, passing it down, making sure that they're honored, you know, in the next generation. It's a constant battle where people don't put the respect on just the simple things like a name. When you receive your name and you have to fight for it, literally. But yeah, what comes to mind immediately for me is my grandfather, being named after him and his father, and the legacy that they left behind. Both war veterans, one from World War I, one from the other from World War II. My grandfather fighting in two different branches of the military and leaving behind just a plethora of different things that I can go into as far as history to research what his life was like. And the more I do that, the more it enriches my life when it comes to just knowing the ins and outs and how to navigate the countryside. Again, I'm a truck driver, and all of the stories that I get to archive in my mind of different things that I got to poke and prod at my grandfather when I was younger, I can actually go out and visit these places now. Him being from Kentucky and then moving into California, that journey itself leaves the door open to a lot of questions. Tulsa being one of them. When you think about Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the freeway that is on top of it now, you know, a lot of these questions are going to bubble up to the surface. They've got to be answered. And yeah, it's going to be a powerful show because I got a lot on my mind. I got to organize it, and get it together, and yeah, I've got a lot to share today.
That was great. That was great. And you reminded me through your commentary to also talk about sacred space. You know, many of you are now well aware that we're sort of in a battle for not just Congo Square, but the history, culture, and tradition that is Treme. Very little of the original Treme footprint still remains untouched. Very little of the original Congo Square acreage remains untouched. And so we need to protect not just, you know, the name, and ancestral names and lineages, but also sacred space. You know, we know of an incident in New York City where, you know, they're building the next high rise and then they find an ancient, you know, African burial ground. I don't like saying ancient slave burial ground, but an ancient Black or African burial ground. And this has happened all over the country. All over the country, this has happened where the footprint of our history, the footprint of our tradition, the footprint of our culture, it has been erased or is actively under attack right now of being erased. I know the beloved Queen Quet. If you don't know who the beloved Queen Quet is, you need to ask somebody and you need to do some research. She is the representative for the Gullah Geechee Nation, and particularly a great deal of the land in the Carolina Sea Islands, North and South Kakalaki, and Northern Georgia, where the Gullah Geechees originally had their physical geographic locations. And so now they're fighting golf courses and resorts. And when we think about the coastline, much of the coastline, particularly on the East Coast, was Black. The colonizers weren't interested in that land. They weren't interested in building on that land. They couldn't grow, you know, food, you know, and crops on that land. So they treated it like wasteland, and we treated it like home, and built encampments throughout, you know, the U.S. in these otherwise unreachable domains. Treme sits in what once was, you know, an unreachable domain. The city of New Orleans proper is the French Quarter. So this side of Rampart would have been swamp and uninhabitable land. Some of you are familiar with Basin Street. There's actually a water basin underneath Basin Street. That's where the water would turn. Many of you are familiar with Canal Street. There's an active canal, you know, that went underneath Canal Street. So we know that, you know, municipalities will come in sometimes with eminent domain, you know, and other forms of trickery, you know, to access our land. We all are familiar with, you know, the inheritance drama, you know, and Big Mama leaving her property or Big Papa leaving a property, and families have fallen out over land, have fallen out over property, have lost property. I know that on my father's side of the family, they lost a hotel and a great deal of acreage beneath the grounds of the hotel because they couldn't agree on who was going to do the talking. They couldn't agree on who was going to interact with the attorneys. And subsequently, the property ended up in the hands of the attorney, and now it's just a distant memory, you know, within the context of our family. So I think knowing who our ancestors are, as my cousin so eloquently described, in Yoruba, Eguns, those relatives that we know, those family members that we know or have name of, and then Egunguns, those more elevated, ascended ancestors, which may or may not be directly related to us. You know, some of us acknowledge Marcus Garvey's, some of us acknowledge Nefertiti and Akhenaten. We all acknowledge many symbolic representations of our ancestors in various forms. You know, we have the king and queen, you know, complex. So we love to acknowledge the kings and queens and rulers, you know, of our lineages. And I was in a phone call yesterday with Orisha, and, you know, she said, if we go far back enough, all of us related somewhere. All of us are related. You know, when we start getting into ethnic groups and geographic locations and very specific events, you know, in our distant and remote past, indeed, many of us will come to find out that we have some interrelation. Orisha gave me a few family names, and those names showed up in my ancestry. Now, we don't know yet if we're related, but I behoove you, and those who I'm actively working with have already done so. I have done Ancestry.com, 23andMe, African Ancestry. You know, there are about a half dozen of them, you know, that I could rattle off. You know, and I often don't tell people exactly what test to take. I will say Ancestry.com is the most popular. and it's the oldest in terms of financial accessibility and accessibility to the general population. So I've found many close relatives in Ancestry.com. My mother took the test, so my mother's in my results. My sister Wapani took the test, so Wapani's in my results. But then my father's children, my half brothers and sisters, they're in the test. Aunts, uncles, cousins, first cousins that we had no knowledge of. Didn't know my father had a brother that had kids until DNA. Had no knowledge of it. So I think it's an important tool for us to use as a part of our ancestral veneration, identifying who they are, identifying who we are. Because the more we're able to identify them, the more we're able to understand, ourselves. Tulsa touched me in many places, the ambitious one. And she said she had the same sort of response to it. And it really made me think about, what did my grandmother really grow up in, in Kirkwood, Missouri? What did her parents have to think, have to believe about themselves to be able to build two houses, and have two lots of land in what otherwise was a white town? Kirkwood has always been a white town. Some serious racial incidents have taken place in the city of Kirkwood. I think a councilman fired a gun, in one of the municipal buildings in Kirkwood. It's the gateway to the West, but it's always had a Wild West sort of undertone to it that even I, as a child, could feel. My grandmother, who I'm so grateful for today, she shopped at white stores. She shopped at the Kroger, the white people's Kroger, the white people's Walgreens, the Dillard's and other stores that I can't remember right now that existed, in my time in the 60s and the 70s in that area. And she held her head up and she demanded respect. And she was respected. Some of you have heard me talk about her before. She, like Marie Laveau, she was a hairdresser, had her own salon in the basement of her house, full salon, waiting area and everything, and so she was an important woman socially in that town. And because she never talked about anything negative or anything traumatic, I never understood her story in its fullness. My grandmother was prim and proper, and you were to be ladylike or gentlemanlike. You behaved when you went out in public. We understood that we were representing her, and that lineage. But she didn't talk about lynching. She didn't talk about racism. She didn't talk about white supremacy, and I don't judge her. I've talked to enough people over the years to understand that was a cultural nuance, I believe, built out of trauma that existed in many of our families. And so they didn't tell the little kids stuff that were going to give them nightmares. They tried not to tell the little kids, bad things. Unfortunately, to some degree, that has hurt us. Particularly Black men. We have to know where we're at when we step out into the street, when we step out into the world. Unfortunately, how to act around police, how to act around the sheriffs, and come home alive. So when we acknowledge ancestors, it's important that we acknowledge history, background, the story, along with just the shrine work and the altar work, and knowing how to speak eloquent, ethnic tongues, Fan and Ewe and Yoruba. But you got to have a clear, just like meditation. Meditation ain't just about breathing and sitting still and quietly and going blank. You got to have an intention. You got to have some kind of context from in your mind that you are pulling from when you're doing ancestral work. Now, Orisha, beloved, I want you to share a little bit about your experience directly with me, as a practitioner, teaching you ancestral work, having done an ancestral divination. If you don't mind, can I show one of your pictures?
Definitely.
Okay. People often say, "Oh, it's a lot of work," and I don't know what to do.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, and it is, but Orisha has just made it just looked so easy and so flawless and so beautiful. And my audience, I've never done this before, so, you know, but this is an example of Chef Bougie and Orisha's ancestral altar. And people talk about, you know, closets and cabinetry, and, you know, I have 2 rooms of ancestors in my house, not because I have to conceal it, but because I work with not just my ancestors, but the ancestors of those who I also assist in their endeavors. But this is a plus in my class of really absorbing the information, the knowledge, and then putting that to work. It is not just an antenna, if you will, or a place from where we draw, you know, and invite our ancestors to get involved and to intervene in our lives. But it's also a place to work out our shadow work and to subsequently bring our family together, even if they don't know what we're doing, even if they're not aware. So I want you to talk a little bit, Orisha, and if you don't mind, share your experience with us, because many people are concerned about how their mom are going to respond. You know, what if my sisters and them find out I got this going on in my house? And so I want you to share your experience, your family experience with working with me and doing this work, but then how your family has responded to it.
Okay, so you know, some of my family, they don't have any information or any footprint, so to say, regarding altars. So first and foremost, my altar is in my house, that when you walk in my house, is visible. It's not in the way, but it is visible. And so as the older auntie and the older person in the family now, my mother transitioned, so now I've moved up in terms of being the so-called matriarch in the family. One of the things, to give an example, is on Mother's Day, everyone decided to come here and gather at my house. And so I had nieces and nephews, little ones, big ones, and people kind of was, you know, I could see the looks in some people's faces when they came in. And so what happened, I took people into the room, because I have a room just dedicated to that. And so I took nieces and nephews, cousins, and it actually became a gathering place where we talked about my mother, we talked about our grandparents. We, you know, right before they came, I was just finishing up, you know, cleaning up the altar and putting food on the altar. So a couple of people had arrived early. They were able to participate in me setting up the altar. So eventually that room, the kitchen is normally the gathering place in the house, but that room ended up being just, we were jam-packed in there. And it was, you know, going over the aunts, and I had the nephew, and he was like, well, auntie, you know, tell me about this, you know, explain this to me. And so, you know, it's, you know, a thing where I've introduced the family members into it to kind of bring them around. And my reception with it, their reception to it was phenomenal for Mother's Day. It just was phenomenal. And so, you know, when they come in, my thing is to teach them what I'm learning.
Yes, and demystify, you know, that idea of wickedness, you know, that the oppressors, you know, have often put on our traditions. And if I haven't already made it clear, it wasn't just that they wanted to demonize our traditions, but they wanted to steal power from us and steal our ability to regenerate power within ourselves, and particularly from that ancestral root. Sacred space is necessary. It's necessary, especially for us, the descendants of enslaved Africans and indigenous people here in the Americas. When we look around us, there are shared, confirmed sacred spaces for government, for white history, for European history, for battles, for wars. We have several quote unquote sacred war grounds, you know, where battles were fought here, you know, in the US. But consistently, and I can't speak, Craig, to the UK, but consistently here in the US, our sacred spaces are being appropriated. And again, Congo Square, Treme is a part of that attempt to erase history, erase culture, erase the footprint of tradition, and relegate it only to books and documents. I also showed at the beginning hour between 11 and noon a video of Freddie Evans Williams, who wrote the book Congo Square here in New Orleans. And she talked a great deal about the culture and the traditions and the practice and the music and the American, now we consider them American traditions that came out of our culture. Jazz, you know, yes, we used a European instrument, a trombone, a saxophone, but we made something new. So not only is sacred space necessary on the ground, but it's also necessary, as Orisha just eloquently demonstrated, that we are able to create sacred space where we are and in our homes and in our environments. It's wonderful to be able to go to see Marie Laveau at St. Louis Cemetery #1. There are a few voodoo priests buried in that cemetery that many people don't know or know where they're located, that I know, and Denise Augustine know. And so it's a pleasure and it's an honor, and it's very empowering, you know, to visit my ancestral grounds in Mississippi, you know, and put my feet, you know, in the dirt that my ancestors walked in. But we also have to be able to create and recreate sacred space within ourselves, within our homes, to acknowledge ancestral veneration. And as Chef Bougie and beloved Orisha are doing, and then teach that to our family, and then teach that to the next generation. I see a day where ancestral veneration and houses, sacred houses, will be erected and maintained primarily for this reason. People are falling away from so-called organized religions, the ones that have dominated us for centuries. And they're looking for something to fill that, to replace that. You know, people don't want to turn their back on God. They want to turn their back on man and religious structures that have been used against us, that have confined us, that have limited our ability to access our power. And so I teach that our ancestors are our front line of defense. They're in your blood. They're already present. Whether you understand ancestral veneration or not, they're already present. They're already influencing your choices, your decisions, your thoughts sometimes. You know, we either hear them and hear them clearly, or we believe, you know, something else. You know, it's just a random thought, or it's just my imagination. But when we actively, just like in meditation, actively activate a word, a phrase, a mantra, and awareness, we indeed open up gates and portals where our ancestors can come in and show themselves and present themselves and really do powerful things in our lives. Like my cousin, I'm beginning to feel like I'm doing a lot of the talking. So I'd appreciate some feedback from my co-host and my audience, wherever you are viewing or listening to the show in the world, and speak to sacredness of places.
I will say that, or say your name for me, please, dear heart, because I want to be able to say your name correctly.
Orisha.
Orisha. Some people say
Okay.
Orisha. It doesn't matter. Orisha or Orisha, whichever one.
Okay.
It's
Well,
how
if it's Orisha, then that's how I'll pronounce it.
it's how Orisha is spelled in Brazil.
Okay. Okay. Understood. I wanted to touch on the story that she shared firstly and say that what you did and how you began to prepare with the ancestral altar. As your family, you said some arrived early and then others at the whatever time that was set. Um, I think it's beautiful that your ancestors showed up and also encouraged the spirit of community and conversation and made sure that everybody was in a place where they were mentally, spiritually, and mentally, like emotionally open to receive what you were sharing. And as children are around and the memories and everything, it allowed them an elevation to share that space with you. And as it flowed, it wasn't the reaction that you thought you might have gotten. I remember during your story, and you said, yeah, you saw a few looks, but
Yeah.
you saw with your own eyes the transformation and how spirit can work a thing and how your ancestors can literally show up and help weave that connection where there's a gap in communication, where there's not as much understanding. That is what was given all in that moment. And the grace that you showed in keeping your cool, not allowing looks or anything else to get to you, also elevated you in that moment as the new matriarch and solidified your position, not just with your family, but with your ancestors as well. So I want to say that that was a beautiful story, powerful on so many levels, and a lot that can be taken from that. Anybody listening, watching, there's a lot that can be taken from that. And it also speaks to the importance of ancestral veneration. As DivinePrince said, he considers them, he teaches that that's your first line of defense because they do live in our blood. There have been a lot of times when we have been in conversation or been thinking something, and whatever came out wasn't necessarily what you would have said, but it would have been someone that you knew, an ancestor of yours, and you go, wow, that's something such and such would have said. It really bothers me to see people, a lot of the younger generation go, oh, you know, we different, we not our ancestors. Sweetie, you absolutely are. I say all the time, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams imagined, walking, talking. We have to learn how to dig deep because a lot of the answers, a lot of the things that we seek, we can gain from our ancestors actually within ourselves. If that's the importance of meditation, prayer, sitting, thinking, being in that quiet space is a power in that. And if we are willing to be still and to listen, just take some time out, you know, prepare a favorite meal of someone you was close to. Take them a cup of coffee. A lot of our elders, a lot of our ancestors loved coffee. You know, take them some coffee. Things like that is so many things that we can do to connect. It doesn't have to be knowing so much. It's just bit by bit. It's just taking those first steps that can mean the difference, that can actually make the shifts in our lives that we're looking for. A lot of it, if we just tap in, that's where it waits. You're muted.
I like to say, you take one step and they will stand up in you. You know, the church used to say you take one step, God will take two. But when it comes to the ancestors, I say you take one step and they will stand up within you. And when I think about the character they took for my great grandparents to build what they built and survive in Missouri in that environment, even though they didn't talk about it, just, you know, my imagination wants to know, you know, how did they process that? How did they get up every day knowing that, you know, they might be slighted, you know, because of their race, knowing that their property might be burnt down, you know, out of jealousy, knowing that, you know, they could be harmed, you know, by the lynch mob at any given point. You know, it's just a profound thing to just sit, you know, and meditate on. And it makes me feel, you know, that we can be petty, you know, in a modern context, you know, about being tired and about being fed up and then think about what our ancestors endured just so that we can be alive. Another myth I want to, you know, put a needle through the balloon is the idea that our ancestors were somehow weak or were somehow passive. You know, they should have got up and went to war. Well, they did get up and go to war. They did fight back. And they fought back in every possible way they could. They absolutely did fight back. And sometimes that meant moving away. Sometimes that meant standing and defending your ground. Now, there were great entrepreneurs and businessmen who stood their ground, in the Tulsa, Oklahoma event and didn't have to, and lost their lives, in the process. Many have given their lives as martyrs, so to speak, for our freedom, for our liberation, for our awareness. And we think now about so many people being, killed by the police, who are now being made martyrs. So many who've been sitting on death row, or have lost their life, only to later on have DNA prove that they didn't have anything to do with it. They now have also become, ancestral martyrs. So there are many degree of ancestors and Egungun. I learned that in the Yoruba in particular, they have a whole, list of names for various types of Egunguns, that exist and interact with us and seek to help us, to move forward. So it's good to acknowledge, all the ancestors generally, but it's even better to acknowledge those that we know and those that are, unknown to us or not necessarily linked to us biologically, but have stood up and really fought a good fight for us. I long since stopped using terminology like, house nigga and field nigga and, only because, it has been turned into, again, a sign of weakness. Somehow the field slave was more dominant and more aggressive and more ready to battle than those who work in the house. And we know that's not true. We demonstrated that very well in the TV series Underground, which we filmed here in New Orleans. And the main characters were primarily in the house. One of the main characters who fled was primarily from within the house, and a Creole girl who we like to generalize as somehow having it easier, having an easier time of it because they're of lighter skin, and that kind of thing still exists today. That colorism, that paper bag test, it has changed, just like lynching has had to change from generation to generation. So no, they don't string you up, by the neck a whole lot anymore. Maybe they don't burn down the whole town or the village anymore. But now it's political redistricting. Now it's through your taxes. Now it's through creating laws and regulations that prevent you from building. It's my understanding in the documentary that 40 square block area had codes in it that many of the Black from rebuilding or returning, their business. And so that sacred footprint, Craig, is essential for us. And here in the States, it is removed and built on top of, if they're allowed to get away with that. When we look at DC, when we look at Annapolis, when we look at Baltimore, when we look at Philadelphia, and remember, there would have been smaller but numerous enclaves of Black communities surrounding, these big centers. And many of them have fallen by the wayside in silence. Many of them have been built over Memphis. There's a section of Memphis that's historic to the Dr. King era that has been neglected and ignored ever since. And they're slowly gentrifying that area now. No one wants to live there. It's a pattern we've seen from LA to New York. They allow it to go down to the pits. They bring in drug activity and drugs into that community. They make it dangerous and scary, to everybody, to want to go through. And then when even those people, have been arrested and evicted and moved away, they let it sit until it goes out of our memory. And we particularly have been accused of having a short-term memory in America. And then they come in and slowly rebuild it, re-gentrify it, and take it back, if you will. I remember white flight. For my younger listeners, that meant certain towns, certain communities. I grew up in Coral Hills, Capitol Hills, Maryland, which was once white. And as soon as the Black family started moving in, all the white families, for the most part, moved out. That's white flight. But that's also a part of the gentrification process. The more black it becomes, the less of value it is to the white system. Sometimes it degrades your home value, you know, if it's only black people in a particular area or community, even if there's no crime. There was hardly any crime at all in that area when I grew up there. The crack era is when that area of PG County changed. And when I went back to see it in 2000, I was shocked and amazed at what Capitol Heights, Maryland looks like today. And what have they done now in 2021? It's completely surrounded by, up to a block away, by brand new condominiums, brand new co-op buildings, either integrated or primarily white. And if you're familiar with the economy of the DMV, it takes a lot of money to live in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area. You know, the average rent, I think, is $1,800 to $2,000 a month. It's comparable to New York City. It's comparable to Los Angeles. It's comparable to Miami. So just imagine, and there's still a large population of black and other ethnic groups, black and brown, you know, ethnic groups in that region. So how do our people continue to survive under all sorts of oppression, you know, and still keep showing up, still keep rebuilding, still keep buying and owning and possessing? And how do we keep believing sort of the lie that we're a weak people, that we can't unify, that we can't come together? I've learned as a mature adult that that's not true either. And there are many people who are coming together, who are building. They're just not doing it in front of the camera. They're just not doing it in social media. Maybe they don't have time to do it, you know, in social media. So as we evolve, as we open our consciousness, you know, to higher vibrations, to God, to the ancestors, I believe we get downloads of information, whole downloads of information that change the way we live, how we eat, how we structure our lives, how we structure our business. And indeed, our ancestors are on that front line of defense. So we pour libation to our ancestors. We feed food and pork and produce to our ancestors. Traditionally, I've sort of done that at the tree in Congo Square, you know, every Sunday or as frequently as I could. And it got to be a bit expensive. And my schedule now is just so overwhelming. So I don't do it every Sunday anymore. I might do it in the middle of the week. I might do it when some of my godchildren or visitors come, you know, to the city, and then we go, you know, as a group and lay offerings down at the tree and pray and chant and acknowledge, you know, our ancestors. But being able to bring that sacredness into your house. And again, it's not just a visual, you know, that sort of reminds us of something, but it's also a motivating factor. You know, it's hard for me to walk past my 3 ancestral shrines, you know, and not acknowledge them, not clean them up, not want to dust them off. See, we don't treat this like the old coffee table with the Bible on it, with the high school diplomas on it that we let get dusty. You know, this is something that we actively interact with every day. And Oloye, in my house, we do follow the ritual calendar. The 4-day ritual calendar is acknowledged in Voodoo, in Togo, in Benin, in Haiti even. And so we do follow, you know, that 4-day ritual calendar. And sometimes people get confused by that because they have those names that sound like Orisha to them. And so I have to keep reminding them that, you know, we're dealing with ancestors, we're dealing with Ifawole, we're dealing, you know, with something a little bit higher than Orisha. Can you talk about that for a moment?
So you want to talk about the difference between Orumile and Orisha?
Yeah, and ancestors.
And ancestors, okay. So Orumile would be the emissaries of Olodumare, directly sent from Ororun, heaven, down here to earth. They are the ones who are given the authority to begin the formulation of what we have as society and the world today. When Olodumare put in his mind that he wanted to develop this earth, then That's what he did. He sent them 201, 200, 401 total. And we know the basics of some of them being like Oshun or Ogun or Batala, you know, the basic ones that the basic Orumile that was sent down. So you have Orumile that would be like Obatala Orumile, Ogun Orumile, Oshun Orumile. But then you have the embodiment of that lived here on earth. They would be the Orisha. They are the ones who lived here on the earth, and they did great things. They elevated the society. They elevated people's consciousness. They lived in a very high place in society. And then when they made their transition, they were then elevated to the state of Orisha as in a similar perspective, like I would say in Catholicism, people when they have done great things as far as the Catholic Church, they saint them. They move them up to sainthood. So when we have the Orisha, we're talking about those who lived on the earth and then elevated to a higher source of consciousness. Ancestors then, in essence, could still be then Orisha, because if Orisha is said to have lived here on this earth, then they now have elevated, and so now we honor them and we give honor to all of their contributions. We give honor to all that they, all the aspects of them. When we are living in that aspect, right? Let's say that as a priest of Oshun, so I have priests in Oshun, in Olokun, in Obatala, Ogun, you know, the embodiment of those Orisha within me are still walking shrines. We're still walking embodiment of the particular Orisha that we initiate into. And the same thing with those of you that are practicing Voodoo and the Louisiana Voodoo. When you guys initiate into whatever the Loa is, you're now a walking embodiment of that Loa. You have taken and placed that energy, that Ashe, within you, and now you are in essence walking in alignment with that Orisha and trying to embody that Orisha as best as you can in the elevation of who you are to live your highest destiny. So now we go back to destiny when we say that we came and we stepped in front of Oludamare, and as we stepped in front of Oludamare and we kneeled in front of Oludamare, then and gave Dobale, we shared with him what it is that we wanted to honor or what we wanted to accomplish in this run here on earth. And when we came down through the family, because it is said in our culture that we come back through the same family, maybe 2 generations, 3 generations different, you know, and so we might come back a great grandfather, even a grandfather if it's not if it's like 2 generations or something. We come back and return as a former and as one who may transition in the family, and then we come back, and that's why sometimes it seems like maybe we know this and know that within the family, and that's something that we weren't taught, or maybe certain talents have manifested in us at a very early age, right? So I was listening to Richard Smallwood, and he was telling a story about, like, at 2 years old, he was humming the songs that he heard in church at 2. By the time he was 3 and 4 or 5, his mother had gotten him a little piano, and that he was able to now decipher how to play some of that. Then he talked about maybe around 6 or 7, he was climbing up to his stepfather's piano, and that he was actually able to start playing, or that he was playing actually at the church. You hear about Andre Crouch and the same kind of thing. He wasn't really taught. He was able to learn by ear. So we look at some of the talents that we might have. And the talents, in part, I suggest, in part, are the return of the ancestors who we are manifesting as we are walking this earth in this realm, in this time. So we are then completing aspects of the work that our ancestors did not, or we're maybe taking it one step further. But we also then are working on the things that needed to be worked on in their life, maybe that they had to improve. Maybe it was that they had to improve on the way that they treated people. So now in this lifetime, we get that lesson subliminally that we need to treat people this way, or we need to do something this way to improve. We see in ourselves, this doesn't feel comfortable. This doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like I'm doing this properly, or I'm treating this properly, or whatever the case might be. And now I'm making this change. So not only am I making a change for this life, I'm making a change for my ancestors as well. So maybe that change then is breaking the chain of something that we have seen over generations. Maybe, and we always hear of different people that say, I need to break the chain of our family falling apart. I need to break the chain of the divorces, of having several kids that are not, in regard to not just wedlock, but there's so many of the kids that when a person has that child, they don't even know where that child is or whatever. And so to break those chains or break those things, those generational curses, says that we are now walking in alignment to correct something that our ancestors needed to correct. We are completing the work of our ancestors. We're doing the work of our ancestors. So I hope that this is making sense, because it's important to me in my perspective to get people to understand how important the work is, and that we, in listening to ourselves, sometimes in listening to ourselves, we hear that voice, don't do that, don't go there. Sit your behind down over there and watch. So not only is it a message from spirit in regard to maybe Oludamare or Ifa or Orisha or Loa telling us, I'm telling you, I don't care who or what, I said, sit down and wait. And then we start getting that message so strongly that we listen and we obey. It's all about the obedience. But also, it could be our ancestors too that are saying, I'm trying to protect your behind. Go sit down and wait. There's going to be answers that are going to be given to you. All you got to do is sit down and obey and wait. Regardless to whether we know that this message is coming from ancestors, or it's coming from Oludamare himself, or Orisha or Ifa, it's all about our obeying and being able, once we obey, we're able to kind of then see the message that's being given to us, and we're able to now say, oh, because even it says in different spiritual traditions, if we obey, even through the discomfort, even through times that it doesn't even look like things are working our way, it is in that obedience that things are actually turning around, and that before long, you're going to see the blessing manifested, and you're going to be blessed because of your obedience. Our ancestors want us to be obedient in their communication with us, just as much as spirit wants us to be obedient in the nature of that too. We talk about Ifa being the wisdom of nature, and that is in essence the basic divine definition. But remember then that in part of that nature that is within us, it is the nature of our ancestors that are within us. So therefore, when we have the wisdom of nature, it is not just the wisdom of nature in regard to Orisha. It is the wisdom of nature in regard to understanding the true essence of our ancestors within us as well. And especially when we understand DNA and we start meeting family maybe from different, you know, and we've not met them before. And then when we meet them at different stages of life, we see so much of us in them. Then we start, oh, wow, whoa, this right here is next level. Like, you know, this is beyond me. This is something that's been in our bloodline, you know. But now I got to do the work now that I recognize it even more if it's something that I know has to be corrected. So I hope that that made sense. I know I spoke long. I'm sorry about that. But, you know, there you go, cousin.
And I'm glad that you did. You told my story just a little bit when you started talking about those gospel pianists and how young they were. I grew up with the piano. I think my mama had a piano from age 1 on up. And my grandmother had a piano in her house. So whether I was at home or at my grandmama's house, I always gravitated, you know, to the piano. And though I did subsequently take music and learn to read music and learn to play the tenor saxophone, you know, in elementary, junior high, high school, I started playing the piano by ear. So much so that it became a conflict between reading music and playing the piano versus my inner inclination to hear it the way you described it, to hear it and hear it again and again, and then be able to sort of mimic that, duplicate that on the keyboard. So I don't know what musical ancestor, I don't know what ancestor liked to write, you know, and create, you know, poems and scripts and plays. But these are things that I was doing as a child, creating things out of boxes and cardboard and even paper mache. You know, I use a lot of paper mache even as a kid, you know, to sort of create things. I took paper drinking straws once. That used to be a common thing, by the way, paper drinking straws. And I would weave them together and make these Japanese lanterns that would be illuminated, you know, from the inside. And where was all of this coming from? And of course, at that time, you know, there was no DNA that we could access. You know, there wasn't a whole lot of conversation, you know, within the dynamics of my family about the past and where we were from, and you know, and so now, as you said, I've sort of had to wait, you know, certain seasons of my life, and now I'm getting so much confirmation about things that I once did, that I, you know, started doing instinctively, intuitively. Craig also asked about transplants and people having, you know, kidney transplant or heart transplant, and then developing certain skills and or knowledge that they did not have before. And I do believe, again, it's in the blood, even though, you know, it's now your blood, but the transplanted organ still has that sort of DNA makeup from the original person. So,
Yes.
yeah, I think there's something that is indeed transferred when people have transplants, you know, of human organs. Not even wanting to think about non-human organs, because, you know, they're now making things in the lab and making things on a pig, and you know, and then transferring it to humans, and it opens up a lot of questions, you know, and conspiracy theories that people indeed have about DNA, and it unfortunately feeds some people's, you know, fear of or anxiety around participating in DNA. The idea that their cells, like Henrietta Lacks, might be used, you know, for something without their permission or even, you know, without their knowledge. And so I acknowledge that, you know, there are all kinds of theories that could be looked at and might even be plausible. But I think the wealth of information that we gain from using the services, for me, and I think for those of you who are still with me on screen, has been valuable. Forgive me, Orisha, but have you all done DNA yet? I can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Okay, we've done 2 tests. So we did the My Ancestry and we did another test, both of us. And I've been connected with people who I know are my cousins. And ancestry, it kind of connects you with the land also. So that's another thing that I like about ancestry. And so on my mother's side of the family, we always knew it was North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina. But then I come to find out that it went down a little further, Tennessee, down towards Louisiana, Mississippi, all of that. So, and then on my father's side was the Caribbean. So, you know, it's been valuable for me. I found cousins. I've been connected with cousins who I know. I was connected immediately with the first cousin. And one of the tests that I took, you know, because I told my husband, I said, listen, this might be something that they're connecting you through your email account. So one, I used not my name. Yeah, I went that far with it. I used not my name, and I made up a Gmail account, and it still connected me with my first cousin. So I just want to see, you know. So yeah, so I've gotten a lot of good information out of it.
Mm-hmm. You're on mute.
That's why I made sure that my mother took the test and my sister Wapani took the test, my mother's two children, sort of for the same reasoning, to ensure that things just was right. I don't even think Wapani used her name when she did hers, you know, her test. And of course, like you said, we still ended up, you know, connecting together. I also want to acknowledge what Oloye said about, you know, just the synchronicity between he and myself and Otun and others that we're meeting through the DNA test. I just don't think it's random or accidental that so many of us are actively involved in ATR, you know, in our lives. And then we're finding this connection, you know, through DNA. And it's something that I've always said, that it's in my blood, it's in the family, it's in our genes. You know, I may not know who the ancestors are, who the family members are, but I know, you know, that they're out there. And now the tests are absolutely demonstrating that. That's the first time I heard you, because I need to look at your DNA too off the air, by the way, Orisha. But that's the first time I heard you make that Mississippi, Louisiana connection. And, you know, I did a quick search yesterday, and your family name show up in my results. What I didn't search was
Wow.
Yeah, so I need to go back and search your name specifically.
Wow.
Since you did take the Ancestry.com test.
I'm adopting her as a cousin anyway.
Yes, we'll gotta get you, we be. And yes, and I also want to know, you mentioned another test. What was the name of that test?
So that was actually the first test that I took. What was that? My Heritage?
My Heritage.
You know, we was like sitting around the house on a Thanksgiving, and it kept coming up on TV, like you can get this DNA test for $49. And so we all ordered it. And, you know, that was the very first one that I took. And then the second one, which I used my real name for and real email address, that was my Ancestry. I actually want to take the 23andMe one.
Yeah, the one goes further in time.
Yeah.
It goes back as far as Neanderthal.
Yeah, there is another one that you can take to where they look at the mitochondrial DNA and they can tell what tribe your family is from, you know, but they only use, I think they only use the mother side, right?
Yeah.
Just like the African ancestry one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dark Soul Jua said she's frustrated with Ancestry. She only got hints for white people. She has never been connected with any of her relatives, so it's frustrating and confusing. That I understand. Now, if I can offer you just a little piece, just know that everybody else that's in your house that's not quote unquote white is connected to you. You know, is indeed a relative of yours. Now, how much of your family has actually taken the Ancestry.com test, whether you know about it or not, that also plays a role. Now, in my family, a great deal of my family on both sides have some reason taken Ancestry. So there's a clear distinction in my ancestry with my mother's side of the family, the Savages, just to name one family name, and then the Broomfields on my father's side of the family. Dark Soul Jew, I found out that my great-great-grandfather was a white Confederate soldier. Now, we're still not clear on if he was Passant Blanc or if he was white. You know, that's still not entirely clear. He had several children. I want to say, I think he had 14 children. And at least
Hey,
two.
Divine, you broke up. You might have to say it again.
Okay.
You broke up that.
Okay, please forgive me. You heard me say that my great-great-grandfather is a white Confederate soldier.
Yes.
And we're not clear on if he's Passant Blanc, which is a phraseology that we've used historically in Louisiana to suggest someone who could pass for white. Orisha with the right hair color could pass for white if she wanted to, so she would have been considered Passant Blanc. So we don't know if my great-grandparents were Passant Blanc or if they were indeed white, but we know they had black children. And so my great-grandfather, along with his wife, Oloye Broomfield and Monroe Broomfield, show up as black in the census records. Now, visually, because I met Oloye, my great-grandmother on my father's side, she looked like an Indian. And Orisha could pass for indigenous or Native American as well. So, you know, ethnicity is such a complicated thing with those tests. And some of those people that you might be seeing Dark Jua as white might not really be white, or they may have embraced the whiteness. And so that sort of followed them historically over time. We know that in some of these families, you know, they had adherence to the brown people bag test. And so you weren't allowed to marry people of a certain shade historically, you know, in our community, as well as in the white community. We know that in terms of enslavement, you know, you had the owners who often intermixed with the slaves, you know, and the family went one direction, the white family went one direction, and then the black family went, you know, another direction. So I'm asking you to be patient with it, to sort of stick with it. If you can do another test with a different company, because all the companies don't have access to the same DNA, all the companies aren't looking for the same thing. So that's why many of us have taken more than one test.
And you know what, cousin? The other thing is, like, around 1870s, when, you know, the natives were going through all the challenges because of Andrew Jackson sending them all over the damn place, and them having to go through the Trail of Tears. It is said then because that was the beginning of the census that the black and different people were able to be on. It is said then that in order for that many of the natives, in order for them to survive, had to either list themselves as black or white. So in some instances, you know, there is the native, but they had to list themselves one way or the other in order just for them to survive and to make it through. That's how dastardly Andrew Jackson had done the people. And so there are, I don't like using tribes, but there are tribes like that you will see very light-skinned or fair-skinned people, but they're not white. They can pass, you know, that way, but they're native. And then, you know, even in our community, as we intermarried in with some of them, like I have Lene Lenape, I have Saponi, and I have Shinnecock. So we have people that have very fair, they look just like cousin Orisha. And so, you know, but they're not white. And so just wanted to throw that in. We also had the natives that had to pick between the white and the black on the census in order to even make it. You're on mute.
Yes, in order to survive. You know, a great deal of shenanigans, for lack of better words, that went on with race and ethnicity, you know, over time. Again, I believe originally that land in that Tulsa, Oklahoma area was considered a quote unquote indigenous land originally. And then
Yes.
as Black people began to move there, it then became a quote unquote Black enclave, you know. But
And
we
the areas around, because the areas around have native names to the towns. Okmulgee, you know, Okmulgee. There's a few other towns, but you see the native names to the areas that are right around Tulsa, right around Jinx.
Yes, yeah, and Craig Burns, they also brought that sort of struggle to New Orleans. After the Haitian Revolution, our city grew in population after the Haitian Revolution. So the notion, the idea that hey, greatly influenced culture here in Louisiana is actually true. It is absolutely true, and that not only includes voodoo, but other cultural nuances, food, spices, way of living, way of dressing, you know, absolutely amalgamated, you know, into the gumbo pot. You know, that is Louisiana. But I often remind people that the voodoo was already here. The Creole culture was already here. The Spanish culture was already here. You know, we went back and forth between the Spanish and the French and then the English, you know, in our history as not only a city, New Orleans, but as a state. The sacredness of Congo Square, just, you know, because Africans were allowed to dance and drum bambula and do our practices and traditions there. But it was sacred even before. It was a sacred place to the Houma Indians and many of the other indigenous people here, and they had corn festivals in that region. So the sacredness has mixed, it has transferred, you know, it has leaped back and forth from one culture to another. And again, particularly for us, it makes that a little bit more complicated and figure out who is what, where we were at any given time. I like that Orisha mentioned that Ancestry.com is good at geographics. You know, it can pull up regions, countries where your bloodline migrated to, moved to, and to give you an approximate date. You know, I can see when my family began to leave the Louisiana, Mississippi Delta area and then move up towards Michigan, Missouri, Chicago. I can see where my mother's side of the family, early, probably one of the first Blacks to be in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area, and then where that began to move south. And remember, there was a time when the import of Africans from the continent was made illegal. And so then your pirates come into play. And so the pirates were bringing slaves up through the bayous and in the swamps and in the hidden areas. And then there was a history of trafficking of enslaved people from the DC, Maryland, Virginia area and bringing them south. And heaven forbid that period where they started snatching free people. You know, you weren't safe entirely in Philadelphia or New York, you know, or Baltimore. If they thought they could trick you and capture you, they would. And then that bloodline would then be brought back into the South. So I don't want to give anybody the impression that just one test is going to help you with all your answers. In fact, you'll have more questions originally than even answers, you know, as you do these tests. But the more that you do, and the more that you get your family involved, you know, if you can, get one for yourself and your mom, yourself and your dad. You know, if you have half brothers and sisters, try and get, you know, them to take a test. I needed that so that I could determine, you know, my mom's bloodline, my dad's bloodline. Of course, my half brothers and sisters are going to show up in relationship to, you know, my dad, but then they have a mother, you know, and I needed a way to sort of distinguish, you know, who's from what. Even on my mother's side of the family, we found what my mom understood to be a family friend that they had always known in the family, and this family friend has the exact same name as a third cousin that's now showing up on our DNA test. And of course, she reached out to him, and he, no, that's not me. But the guy that's on the DNA test is a little bit much younger than him. So again, men having children and more children and unknown children, in my family, that has been a problem. Oloye talked about the ancestors stopping certain things. I knew at age 3, 4, 5, I would never have children. Has nothing to do with being gay, even though I believe a person is born with sexual identity. But you're not thinking about sexual identity at 3, 4, and 5. But I knew instinctively, it's one of the reasons I got expelled from kindergarten, for being precocious and saying very adult-like things that they thought was inappropriate. And so they went around the room, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I'm not going to have children. I think I was removed from kindergarten like the next day after having said that, because maybe they thought I was a danger to the other children. They only picked up on my dislike, for children, but it wasn't about a dislike for children. It was about a feeling of disconnection from children. And that did show up as a child with me befriending older people. And I think she says she has that in common. I always wanted to be around older people, adults, where real conversations, going on. I didn't find kid activities entertaining. And then my father only exasperated that because we weren't allowed to get toys for Christmas. We got books, we got clothes for church, we got more serious, things at Christmas. So I grew up as a very serious, mature, kind of kid. And how much influence of that comes from my grandmother. Oloye really puts me in a position to think about that, because both of my great grandmothers and my father's mother were very severe. I don't remember her smiling a whole lot. I don't remember her laughing a whole lot. We're very severe. And in the absence of information, we don't know what kind of trauma, rape, abuse, lynching that they witnessed, lynching that they might have had to flee from, that they just swallowed. And then it developed alcoholism on my father's side of the family, drug abuse, generational drug abuse on my father's side of the family. And so I, instinctively felt that it was the will of God, that I was born and created exactly the way that I was, and that my awareness that I wasn't going to have children was an act of God. I believe that generational curse of having multiple children that are either abandoned or neglected, I think that's a word that might apply to what you said, Oloye. They have kids, but then they go neglected, ignored, not supported, not fed. And I believe I was to stop that. And my sister Wapani only has one child, a grown son, a chef, Chef Bougie, a young up and coming, he's right around 30 years old in St. Louis, So many things transfer from generation to generation through our blood, through our ancestry. Some of it is shadow work, some of it is things that we have to confront, but so many of our gifts, our skills, our ability, and indeed our ability, cousins, to get in front of this camera, like Orisha said, and to talk and to share takes a lot of energy. Not just being able to speak and articulate, but a lot of energy. And there's so much going on here with chats and buzzing and beeping and bells on. It's easy to get distracted. And so I think this is a gift that's passed down through our bloodline. So I'm expecting us to find great orators or an author, or great musicians the more we dig into our background. And of course, ministry. Religion has been a major thing on my father's side of the family. From Voodoo to the Spiritualist church, to the evangelical ministry, to the Jehovah's Witnesses that many of my cousins are today. Religion has played a major part. It's either been a disagreement, it's either caused some people like my mama to go blind to reality and not to focus where she needed to focus. you know, or it's been, you know, a benefit. I don't want to discredit, you know, what we gained from the Black church, you know, what we gained through religion. Indeed, many of our ancestors called on that and relied on that. But I'm also aware of how much of the Voodoo and the Ifa and the Islam and the other traditions that we brought with us stand up now in our demonstration, in our practice. You know, when we think about the ancestor altar, we often think about Black, African, you know, but I got Middle Eastern blood too. I got a little bit of Asian blood too. And even as a child, that stood up in me. You know, I had liberty, I guess around 12 or 13, maybe 14 or 15. You know, I had a little bit of liberty to sort of decorate. And I had decorated my entire room in Japanese. I mean, the pillow shams, the spread, the curtains, the Japanese lanterns I told you I made out of paper, paper straws, you know, only to find that Asian standing up in my DNA. Over the course of my life, you know, maybe once a month, once every 2 months, I wake up, usually on a Saturday for some reason, and it's just Arabic and Sufi, just moving through me. And so I listen to Arabic music all day, like 12 hours of just Arabic music. I watch the whirling dervishes, you know, and I burn my frankincense and myrrh. And I got a few, you know, Middle Eastern pieces in my house. I got some ancient Egyptian pieces in my house, you know. I have ancient Egyptian blood, something that I never thought possible. I used to laugh at people who, you know, acknowledge their ancient Egyptian background without having done a DNA test. You know, but once I did the DNA test and found out that we were descendants of Ramses III, you know, it pulled things together for me. And again, that's the 23andMe, Oloye.
Okay.
Chef Bougie, Orisha, Neil, that's the 23andMe. It goes back further in time, as far back as Neanderthal. So whether you want to know it or not, it's going to tell you how much Neanderthal blood you have. And I hope after the previous shows that we've done, that you all stop using the word caveman. Because, you know, when we think about Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon and the other hominids, I showed y'all a picture. They were very Black. They were very nappy. Some of them had beards. Some of them had long hair. They were very, very Black people. They weren't Africans, because that's a new word, but they were very, very Black people. And many of us have some of that mixed in our blood. There's no such thing as a test that's going to be 100% African. Not after the last 600 years or more of history. Because I have to include the Arabic slave trade. I have to include that. A great deal of Africans, even before the mid-Atlantic slave trade, were being taken into Southeast Asia, into the Middle East, you know, and even north into some aspects of Eurasia. So don't be surprised about who you're connected to. I got Koreans in my Ancestry.com test, Koreans. I got Africans. I've got Europeans. I've got South American, you know, some speak Portuguese, some speak Spanish, some names I can't even pronounce in my blood test. And my ancestry narrows my indigenous footprint specifically to Mexico and that region of the US that was once Mexico, because we have to think about timing, where your people were at a particular time in history. The second large place is Brazil. So I know I have an ancestral connection to Brazil. And then one island that most people don't know anything about, Dominica. Not Dominican Republic, Dominica. It's a much smaller island than many of the other islands. I think it's at the very last island of the Caribbean. Am I right, y'all? If anybody knows what I'm talking about, Dominica. So look for
on Google Earth map open.
Yeah, I think it's Dominica. I think it's the very last Caribbean island. Orisha and Chef Bougie, look for Dominica on your Ancestry.com profiles and see what might come up.
My parents have been there.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I had never heard of Dominica, honestly, until I took the Ancestry.com test. So even as educated as I might come off, as well read as I might come off, I had never heard of Dominica. So I was kind of surprised by that, and such a specific location. That was very surprising to me. Do we have any questions from our listeners, from our participants? Let me go back and read some of the chat. So someone else can speak if you want to while I'm looking at my chat.
Real quick, if I can go ahead and get this off. My camera is overheating. My phone is overheating and it's sucking through charge. So I'm going to try to be as quick as I can before it shuts me off again. For the millennials out there that are participating with us and getting a chance to sit under these trees and soak up this knowledge, it's important to understand timeline when it comes to this Tulsa burning documentary. It's a repackaging because if you like documentaries, then you're going to know that there's plenty of documentaries on Tulsa, Oklahoma. Some aren't as good, some go into great length, but none of them are going to actually take you down that road on how people actually dealt with and survived coming out of that, how they rebuilt. They're not going to go into a lot of detail on the struggle and the trauma. That's going to be left up to you in order to dig into that. Know that there's a highway on top of every Black community for that time period. But more importantly, look at the journey that they had to go through in order to get where they are now. I'm going to try to focus in on just the Tulsa part about it.
Mm-hmm.
If you actually go into Oklahoma and you see where your highways are, if you see where your freeways are going to be plotted exactly into those areas where Black communities would have actually been able to take a foothold and build back.
That's right.
Their communities. That's not by accident. You can't just accidentally plot a freeway through somebody's community. So when you go into, let's go into Florida, and we see the toll roads, the toll lanes, the highways, and look at where the communities used to be. And you see that there's a correlation between the freeways and where your older communities were. This is not accident. You got to go into this history. It's important to know these histories because we're the next generation that's going to have to deal with whether or not we're going to allow a freeway to go through our neighborhood or not.
That's right.
They will not hesitate to do this at all. They won't hesitate to do this. I'm not saying they like the government. I'm talking about your contractors and your commercial industry as well.
Mm-hmm.
Not just the big bad government,
mm-hmm.
but we're talking about corporations.
That's right.
Big businesses. They don't answer to nobody. They will implement eminent domain and tell you that your land isn't as valuable as you think it is, tax you for it, and then remove you from it. That's not how that works because that's not what they do to their communities. I've driven through at least a dozen different ghost towns where they used to live and moved away, but the town is still there, but there's no highway paved over it. That seems a little odd to me.
Yeah, that's important to note. Dark Soul Jua mentioned that earlier in the chat conversation, that, roughly 50, 60 years ago, they destroyed this community that I live in, historic Treme, by putting a highway, the 10, through here. And what once used to be what we call a neutral ground. You all call it a medium strip. But a neutral ground in New Orleans is a little bit wider, had huge old trees. It was your playground. Your kids could go outside and cross the street and be in the neutral ground and play games. And we would barbecue and we would socialize. People would bend and sell. And so they cut down all the trees, and locked in the neutral
90
ground
seconds.
by a concrete structure, which now allows the Highway 10 to pass over. So not only are they now attempting to sort of remake Congo Square for a municipal government building, but that's already in conversation too. We've been discussing the tearing down of the Highway 10 for the last 5 years. That is going to further change this community. It's going to make it easier for the new residents and the new gentrifiers to come and go
60 seconds.
from a Black community that once upon a time that would have even had fear to come over here. And then we're going to have this governmental building, you know, in our shadow, in my direct view, with 2 10-level parking garage and a 7-level parking garage, where right now I'm seeing trees in Congo Square and Mahalia Jackson. So Electro Vibe said, yeah, that's called redlining. And they've done it all over the country. They've done it all over the country. So, and I want to say too, because we're running out of time, buy land. Buy land. I know investing is popular right now because of social media.
And
So-
don't give up family land. When you get somebody that makes their transition, don't be so quick to sell that land. Keep that land so that you have generational wealth for the future generations. Put it in your will that when I leave you this land, that this land is never to be sold. We are to keep this land in our family, in our bloodline.
I just had an uncle that passed away, and all of my cousins collectively sold off his home, great big home in Utah, of all places. Black family in Utah, you can't keep that foothold. I mean, I don't like Utah myself, but geez, you can't just let this go past. If you sell it off, yeah, you got the money in hand, but then you lose your actual placehold. You lose that thing that is going to actually create revenue for generations down the line. But cash in hand isn't going to do that. So millennials, anybody around my age, younger, maybe slightly older, but we won't go into that detail. This is why it's important to understand why Orisha, why your ancestors being venerated is so important, is because we're next in line. We're next in line to pass this down. And if we're selling off property and just kind of giving in to what's going on, we're just going to get bulldozed over, like all along the border. I said this the last show I was on. All along the border, they bulldozed more than 40 sacred places,
including sacred mounds. Yeah,
sacred mount. They bulldozed it because they wanted to build a wall to keep Mexico from, first off, New Mexico, Texas, Arizona, California, Oregon, Utah, that's all Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You want to get real technical, their capital was New Mexico. General President Santa Anna struggled just to get back down before the Alamo. So it's important to understand these little details of the journey, not just the history, but the journey for your grandparents, what they had to do to get to where they are now. Where you're at now has everything to do with what struggle they went through to get you there, to make sure that they're there. So it's important that you understand what they did, what they had to struggle through in order for you to be here.
And what they sacrificed.
What they had to sacrifice. I realized that sacrifice from my grandfather. He had 2 homes in a town that nobody knew about, but over time it grew into something else, and all the rest of the family started following suit. They built up that community, and now what goes through there is a railroad. It's not accident. It's a whole railroad that divides that town up, and now it's gentrified and Hispanic community. I love Hispanic community, but as soon as that happened, then all of the corporations started slowly but surely moving in and evicting those people and putting warehouses in. It's a pattern. Let's go into the city of industry real quick. The city of industry in California and the city of commerce. Those were all communities before they started putting those warehouses in. And now you have homeless and warehouses. That's it. Where did all the people go? Oh, right now they have vouchers. If you're in a LA County community, you get a voucher to move out towards the desert. A voucher. What is that going to do? That's an IOU. What do you? It blows my mind for our generation not to pick up on what's going on around us. More and more of us need to really start figuring out that they've struggled for a reason. You can learn from their struggle. Their struggle is scaffolding that you can stand on so that you can rebuild your life and your children's life. Because what are they going to do when they have to venerate you?
That's right.
Right.
Listen, I'm going to have to move forward because I have an appointment, even on Memorial. But I appreciate everyone for showing up and sharing your story, sharing your experience. Chef Bougie and Arisha, I love you and I appreciate you coming in and taking the time to show up as a couple today for us on this special holiday.
I have adopted you both.
Thank you, everybody.
I love this platform. I love this. I love to be able to come here and commune with everybody. You all are my family. So I love this space that we come into to share and to learn. I'm just grateful for this space.
Thank you. And of course, Neophyte Bokur and Oloye, Ifawole, I appreciate you both for being present here with me. If you have any closing words, please go ahead. I'm going to move forward.
May Ifa bless each and every one with all the lafiyanire and all the sweet things of life. So, blessings to everybody.
Odabo.
Odabo.